Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by John Strand. Secure World Boston is hosting their 15th annual conference, March 27th and 28th, at the Heinz Convention Center. Security Weekly listeners save $100 off a full conference pass by visiting secureworldexpo.com and using the discount code SecurityWeekly. Also, register for our upcoming webcasts with logarithm and recorded future by going to securityweekly.com/webcasts. If you've missed any of our previously recorded webcasts, you can find them at securityweekly.com/on-demand. All right. John, we're going to talk a little bit about kind of what you saw at RSA Conference. Paul and I have a pre-recorded session right after this that we did our recap on Monday for the audience. But let's jump in and cover some of the things you wanted to talk about from a recap.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the swim lane thing. I know that it kind of blew up on Twitter, and there was a lot more hatred, I think, than there should have been. I actually saw the swim lane demonstration, and I think we have some pictures that will pop up of that. And it was incredibly well done. I was absolutely amazed at the marketing team's ability to think outside of the box and to do something that was actually very different. One of the problems you run into in this industry is how do you break out in such a way that it actually makes your product and your company stand out differently. Now, sometimes you can go too far. And what we saw with the swim lane the kind of demonstration is they talk about, the copying and pasting and, we need better automation. And this ties into SOAR, and I want to talk more about that a little bit later. And I thought it was neat because walking by it, I was like, what is this? They handed out a handout, and they didn't have like little flyers that said, check out our product. They just basically said, see booth, and then they gave the booth number for swim lane. And it was hilarious. It was funny. One of the little fake news stories in their handout was like a CTO excited to see thousands of messages in his inbox and depressed to find out that it wasn't Tinder, but it was from his security product and alerts. It kind of felt like an onion kind of handout, but it really kind of got to a whole bunch of problems that we see with a lot of people in the industry that are just, swimming in alerts, and they are just, copying and pasting between different tools. So it was really well done. Now, there's a lot of questions as far as if they notified RSA, did they notify RSA, did they have a meeting with RSA, and it all went sideways. And I'm kind of on the fence about a lot of that. Like, yeah, you would want to get permission. I think that's always a good idea. Do notifications. That's always a good idea. But something like this was so far outside of the norm, I think it would have been difficult for them to adequately explain what it was that they wanted to do. Because as soon as you say, well, we're gonna have a mock demonstration, people are going to get uncomfortable. But seeing the demonstration and the signs and everything that they did, it really highlighted a cool message. I thought it was executed very well. Maybe not the logistics in the background, but it was neat. It was really, really cool. And I know some people are like, this is insensitive. I don't understand where that's coming from. But I wanted to talk to that little bit of controversy because it was fun. It was cute. And I know a lot of the people at Swim Lane took a lot of flack for it. And I just wanted to stand up for them because I thought it was a neat approach.
Yeah, I saw it as well. I was on the way to the keynote sessions. We were at Broadcast Alley on Tuesday morning. People were heading to Moscone West for the keynotes, and we were on the other side, so I came around the corner, and I saw them at the corner of Howard and 4th, I think is where it was. And I was like, what is that? And then I realized, oh, I know those people, right? Because they're Colorado-based, and we had Cody Cornell on a few weeks ago on this show talking about SOAR specifically. And from a marketing perspective, I agree with you, John, way outside the box. No one has ever done anything like this. I thought it was something that was very innovative. However, the challenge for them, I think, is if you're not coordinating with RSA Conference and you look at the code of conduct and you look at what the aftermath of that was, it's like, oh, that's too bad, right? Because, look, RSA Conference has taken some flack over the last couple of years for different activities. And I know they have the zero tolerance policy. I know why. I worked for RSA for a few years. I know the conference staff extremely well. And I know just some of the stuff they've had to deal with over the years. So from a policy perspective, I understand it, but it was very innovative. I thought it was well done. I don't think it was super dangerous, but I think from the conference perspective, they're balancing the concerns where they've had some issues in the past, trying to create a standard policy across the board. If they would have worked with RSA Conference, maybe the same results wouldn't have happened. But yeah, it was very interesting to see, actually.
Yeah, and I would caution anybody that's dealing with the kind of logistics of something like an RSA, is something bad happens in the past. Just because someone poops themselves doesn't mean that everybody has to wear diapers in the future. And I feel like, the intense need for organizations to avoid risk at all costs will stop this type of innovation. And we don't know the politics of what happened in the background, right? Did they try to contact RSA? Did RSA ignore them? Did they send them a write-up of what they wanted to do? I don't know, and that's not my thing. But I think I will tell people, please push the envelope, do something interesting. There was a handful of RSA booths I'll remember for a long time. This is one of them. And the other one, unfortunately, I won't ever remember the vendor. They had the Back to the Future 1984 themed booth that had like a Nintendo and all kinds of cool stuff. Like I said, unfortunately, I don't remember who that vendor is, but that kind of shows the opposite end of the spectrum, where you can do something really, really, really cool and really innovative, but it doesn't really tie into the messaging. It doesn't really tie into brand awareness. And now for me, for the rest of my life, I'm going to have SOAR and Swimlane completely tied to each other, because this unique marketing thing directly tied into the problem called out an issue. And unfortunately, I probably wouldn't have remembered Swimlane at all if the fracas wouldn't have happened afterwards. But think of like the marketing that they got out of this. They did far better at RSA than hardly any other vendor short of Alphabet. And yeah, it took some knocks, but no press is bad press, right?
So you're not talking about the Tenable booth a few years ago where we did the gaming thing?
No, I would never talk about that, ever. So, but this also leads into SOAR. We wanted to talk about that briefly. I would caution anybody that is looking at a SOAR platform, what are you doing with SOAR? If you're looking at SOAR to try to do orchestration and automation and take your existing workforce and reduce that workforce and automate as much of that workforce as possible, you're doing it for the wrong reasons. If you're trying to implement SOAR so you can automate the mundane things so that your staff can start doing harder things in computer security, then you're using that automation correctly. And I feel like a lot of the messaging last week was, look at all the automation we can do. We can automate end to end, and we really don't need people to be doing things. And that's a really bad message. Security people want a security. They want to do technical things. They want to get into the weeds. They want to do fun things. They want to research different weird anomalies on the network and software and weird blips. And I feel like SOAR would give them the opportunity to do more difficult and challenging work. Unfortunately, it's not really being sold as that. Unfortunately, it's being sold as a replacement for the hiring crisis that we have in security. Unfortunately, it's being sold to executives as you can reduce your workforce because you can replace it with automation. So go into things for the right reasons and you'll do a lot better with those products.
Yeah, Paul and I talk about this in the pre-recorded session that's next, is a lot of automation themes at RSA this year, which, look, I started talking about this in late 14 and 15, that we would need aspects of automation to help us scale. We can't keep up with the hackers. I'm not saying you displace people, but to your point, if automation is taking off certain tasks that are mundane and can be automated as part of the response process, that means my skilled resources that are sitting in the SOC can now do more things to help find other holes in my environment to close them down. And I agree with you. I don't think it's not meant to replace people. It's meant to deal with aspects of the shortage for those things that are mundane and can be automated, but you still need those skilled resources to do threat hunting and other activities to make sure that the rest of your environment's secure, because the hackers are constantly evolving. And if our resources internally don't have the time to continue to innovate and look and address some of these other aspects, we're going to continue to fall behind. And that was really, I think, the original promise of SOAR, not, hey, I'm going to automate everything. You don't need a human anymore. I can't see that in our space anytime soon.
Yeah. Yep. And then the final thing for me, and I know you guys have your segment, Chronicle Backstory is amazing. If you haven't seen it, check it out. I went and I think I got 3 demos from 3 different people that were former students of mine. And it was it's basically the way I try to sum it up for people that don't know is take an ELK stack. ELK is very, very cool. You can throw lots of logs into it, and you can search it. You can visualize it with Kibana, and that's great. But scaling that out to very large data sets, getting it working properly and making it instantaneous is very hard. Writing different filters and correlations can also be difficult for many people. So the way I look at Chronicle Backstory is it is an ELK stack that actually works at scale. So it was, and once again, I'm not ripping on ELK. It is free and it fits an amazing niche. But whenever you have someone that says you can throw all your logs, it'll automatically correlate them, use them together. You never have to get rid of logs, and they're not charging you based on the amount of bandwidth going into the service or the amount of logs that you're dumping into it. That is an absolute game changer. And every single SIEM, log analysis, and data lake vendor has got to start upping their game. And I really hope they do, because I think that having competition is a solid good thing for security. But I think it's going to be real hard. And Matt, I want to get your take on this. It's going to be real hard for organizations that don't have the power of Alphabet behind them to be able to compete with this type of scaling and this type of data size.
I agree with you. I think it's very difficult to roll your own and get it to scale effectively. And you've got all the resources of Alphabet behind you. I think the one concern, though, is the whole concern with what are they going to do with the data, the privacy of the data. I think that's the only downside to the whole Chronicle Google announcement on the SIM side that happened at RSA, John, is do people trust Google enough to protect their data, and what are they going to do with it? But from a scale perspective, there's nobody better in the industry than Google, just bar none. That's what they've done super well. So you're right. Scale will be hard for others to compete with, but if they're worried about trust of what they're going to do with that data, that could be their limiting factor at the end of the day.
Well, and I feel like that's a really bad marketing strategy. I talked to a handful of firms at RSA, and I'm not going to mention any of them because I have friends at those places and they're awesome firms. And they kept coming back to that same theme. It's like, well, but it's Google. Do you trust Google with your data? And I feel like that's a really bad marketing and sales approach for these vendors, because the answer innately is yes, we already do. People trust Google with their searches. People trust Google with their email. People trust Google with their mobile devices. And if you're using that as your marketing strategy, as a wedge between your customers going to something like Backstory and Chronicle, you're going to lose, and you're going to lose badly. However, I do think that a lot of the vendors, and some of them are vendors that are on our show, right? I think a lot of our vendors have a tremendous amount to bring to the table for user behavioral and entity analytics. They have a tremendous amount of resources and prior knowledge in handling hard security problems for their customers that Google does not have yet. But I think that they should start focusing on those key differentiators rather than just saying, well, it's Google, right? And you're going to trust Google whenever the person you're talking to has an Android phone in their pocket. So they've got to find better strategies. And if you're a marketing person and that's your strategy, I recommend you need to augment it very, very quickly. Go back and identify what your core competency was before, double down on that, and refine it as much as you possibly can. In short, the days of treating these companies as cash cows and not really innovating because there's a large amount of money that's coming in already. It's time for these organizations to go back into a startup mode mindset. Start innovating, start coming up with creative new ideas again. Because we've seen a ton of companies, I'll pick on FireEye. Years ago when FireEye came on the scene, they were amazing. It was so incredibly cool and revolutionary. But over time, that became more of a cash cow, and you stop seeing the research, the development, the innovation coming out of it, and then it becomes stagnant. If your company has that core competency, go back to it. Startup mindset, come up with innovative new ideas and products and services and integrations, and I think that you'll do fine. But if your entire strategy is, well, we're not Google and they're the evil empire, you're going to have a really hard time winning that argument. All right, so I've now officially taken over Enterprise Security Weekly, everybody. And with that, we're going to bring this show to a close. Once again, be sure to check out our announcements. If you just Google Enterprise Security Weekly Wiki, it'll take you right to the show notes. And also check out the show notes for Security Weekly, Enterprise Security Weekly, Startup Security Weekly, Application Security Weekly, Application Security Weekly, everywhere. Please go check it out. Thank you so much, and we'll see you back next week.
The modern attack surface is vast and permeable, extending from the data center to the cloud and device edge. Security teams are stretched thinner and thinner as they try to cover this ground. The result? More high-profile breaches hit the news every day. Don't let your organization be next. ExtraHop delivers security from the inside out, helping enterprise security teams detect threats up to 95% faster and cut staff time to resolve by 2/3 or more. Act with confidence. Learn more at extrahop.com/securityweekly. The greatest threat to businesses today isn't the outsider trying to get in. It's the people you trust, the ones who already have the keys. Your employees, your contractors, and privileged users. 60% of online attacks are carried out by insiders. To stop these insider threats, you need to see what users are doing before an incident occurs. Observit combats insider threats by detecting risk activity, investigating in minutes, effectively responding, and stopping data lost. Give it a test drive at observit.com/securityweekly.
Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Paul Asadoorian. So this segment, we're going to do our RSA recap. Paul and I were in San Francisco last week, and we thought we'd kind of give you a summary of all the activities we got to participate in. And at the end of this segment, we'll do some of the pre-recorded interviews as a third segment. So Paul, welcome.
Yes, thank you, Matt. This is exciting. It was a good RSA conference. I thought overall very positive in everything that we did, right? I also have to say that you and Sam were awesome in organizing everything, like literally so the audience knows, like I showed up and Matt and Sam told me where I needed to be and what I needed to do. And it went on. I mean, other than trying to find our banner backdrop thing, I thought everything and the flights out there, both of which were way outside of our control. Everything went really smooth. So good job, Matt and Sam, for a successful RSA conference. Blessed to have you both on the team and have such a great organization for a conference, especially one as large as RSA, right?
Yeah, we had a lot of activities in 2 days, and it's all on Sam, by the way, because she did all the back-end coordination of getting all the briefings scheduled, all the interview segments scheduled. I mean, what
briefings.
People have to understand is we had 2 days at Broadcast Alley, Monday and Tuesday. You and I did 23 briefings and interviews in 2 days. Awesome. If you look at my calendar, every half an hour slot from basically 9:30 in the morning to 4:30 in the afternoon, it was full, right? You and I were just nonstop.
It was
for
great.
those 2 days.
And I thought out of all the 23, they were all positive, and for the most part, I mean, maybe one or two, not so much, right? But there's a lot of things to see, a lot of things to do, a lot of companies doing some really cool stuff. And I think we only had one that we have to reschedule. So, I mean, out of 23, I mean, that's pretty good, I think. We chose wisely, I thought.
Yeah, and I did a couple after you left, just to kind of round out a couple that we couldn't do. Because we were there on Monday, we had a little limited availability for some people because they were flying in on Monday. So Monday wasn't as busy as Tuesday. Tuesday was just jam-packed.
Right.
And, I did my stats, right? I tweeted this out, but I checked my health app. 16 miles of walking in 4 days. Now, 2 of those days we were recording and happened to be 6 miles of the 16 miles.
Right.
Which means on the 2 days we recorded, which means you and I were in Moscone West, basically nonstop.
Yes.
You still average 3 miles a day walking. And then on the 2 days we didn't record, I averaged 5 miles a day in walking. So it's a lot of back and forth to and from Moscone and different meeting locations.
Got to have comfy shoes.
Yeah.
For sure. Both days even, because they're still walking even when we're in one place.
Yeah, definitely. So one other thing I wanted to highlight is a lot of people asked me before I went, I still do a lot of advisory for some of the investors, and they're like, what are you expecting to see? And we talk a lot about things like ML, AI, blockchain, right? So I was expecting to see a lot of that in the advertising. Now, we saw a lot of AI. I took a bunch of pictures of AI-enabled, AI-specific stuff. I didn't see a lot on ML. I know it was in the conversations, but you didn't see machine learning and that really prevalent in a lot of the booths. But I did see a lot on intelligent and intelligence, even outside of the use of the term artificial intelligence, which I thought was pretty interesting. in that how do you make data intelligent so it's actionable? Saw a lot of that messaging. And then the third one, which I guess I shouldn't have been surprised by, was Zero Trust. Zero Trust was all over the place on the expo hall as well. So those were kind of my three big kind of marketing buzz terms for the week last week.
Yeah, I think that the two kind of themes that came out of the show, one was just overarching. Everything in the middle of our communications is just becoming the way that stuff gets there, right? And security, I really think, has shifted to the user and has shifted to the app and the data, right? I mean, data is kind of thrown in there, and Matt, this is kind of your mantra, right? But really, in all the solutions that I saw, it was about everything in between the user and the app is the transport, right? And security has slowly shifted to user and identity, the things that surround protecting the user and protecting the application. And whether that's, fancy in the container space or inside the application itself, or managing the data that is being transferred between the user and the application. That was kind of the big theme that I saw, less and less reliance on more traditional network type security, although that was still there as well. But the focus was on the network side was doing that at scale, and security, again, pushed out to the app and the data, in my opinion.
Definitely. I mean, five, I'm an app user data guy, but only 5 of my briefings were pure play app user data out of my 11 briefings in over the week. Yep. You're right. A lot of transport layers. So there's a lot on cloud security, still a lot on email, web traffic, because those are transport layers between the human, right, and the app or the email, which is an application basically at the end of the day. So definitely a number of things there. Some big stuff on the external digital risk front, right? Took a couple briefings there. The guys looking at the external risk of people's digital assets. They're using it for third-party and fourth-party vendor management kind of stuff. Those were definitely a big chunk of the briefings that I did last week.
The other trend was certainly this push towards automation and response, right? Automating the response, essentially. Almost so many vendors, I won't say every single one, but many of the vendors I spoke with were pushing towards, yes, we identify that problem. By the way, we give you this automated way to just go fix it. We saw that in the Qualys announcement, which was big in the VM space. So many other spaces and companies are really just pushing towards, because there's so much infrastructure, because, we saw it with virtualization and we could deploy infrastructure more quickly. We saw it with cloud. We could deploy it more quickly. Now we're seeing it with serverless. But fast forward to today, and the merging and culmination of all those technologies means that organizations can spin up new infrastructure and applications so much faster than ever before. Therefore, the drive and requirement for automation has slowly been building over time. For me this year at RSA, it was really kind of like the coming out party for automation, to be like, look, we have to, there is no way we can secure our organizations without some automation.
Agreed. You and I have been talking about this for over 4 years, right? I always knew this trend would continue because there's no way humans can keep up with all the things that we need to address in the enterprise. Automation was the only way we were going to get there, but it required that level of trust building with the data and the analytics and what actions we were going to take. But you're seeing now a lot more talk about automation, even outside of even the SOAR platforms.
Right.
You're seeing it in a lot of other places. I think one of the pictures I took was intelligent action or something like that. It was like, interesting. You're seeing that concept of automation coming through even outside of the SOAR platforms, which is, I think, great for the industry if we're trying to fill some of those people gaps, and we're trying to stay at least at the pace of attackers, because they're outpacing us every single day. And if automation can help us catch up a little bit, I think that's good for organizations and good for us as an industry.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, and I think we've reached a tipping point, right, where the vendors have finally said, you know what, we're going to give people automation. And I think the users have said, you know what, we're going to use that automation. So it's great. You want to dig into the individual? I think those were the themes, certainly. We covered kind of the AppSec themes on Application Security Weekly, so you can check that out with Keith Willett and myself. And I did cover Secure Code Warrior on Application Security Weekly. Just really quick, Peter Donahue, Matthias Madhu, they came together. Peter was doing the CTF kind of gamification. Matthias was working on the linting tool, so inside of it when you're coding, making suggestions. They came together so that you can customize your training for your developers, and while they're coding, make that training relevant and it's just like Lego building blocks for your secure software development lifecycle to get your developers on board with security. I thought it was one of the most innovative ways in which you get your developers involved in security. So that briefing went really well, and hopefully we'll hear more from them.
Yeah, I had a couple on the API security side, because this is that emerging area around AppSec of how do I secure my APIs? Because we know that with microservices, mobile-based applications, API communication is exploding. 42 Crunch and Spherical Defense were a couple of the briefings I did this week or last week at RSA. Both focus on API security, slightly different. 42 Crunch really looks at defining what the API is supposed to do, and then based on that definition, try to build some policies and enforcement around how those APIs should work. Spherical Defense, more about trying to identify where the APIs are in the environment, which I think is a huge struggle for application teams and security teams with the explosion of microservices, and then the ability to start protecting those APIs once they've been discovered. So two very different approaches in that front.
Yep, absolutely.
I also got a chance to spend a little bit of time with the SysTig CTO, Loris. Obviously in the container security space, I think most people would know them initially for container monitoring in their open source project Falco. Some people use that to build out a container security product, and then SysTig built SysTig Secure, moved into the security side of the containers. Really interesting backstory. Definitely want to get Loris on Application Security Weekly to talk more about Falco and the open source stuff, because I think some people would like to leverage that open source tool with some of the base container monitoring and security capabilities that it offers.
Yeah, you ended up doing some more of the AppSec related ones. That's just how it unfolded.
Correct. On the identity side, I had a briefing with Viridium, and this is an interesting approach. They're eliminating the passwords or using biometrics, true biometrics, as the password component. So they've built kind of this. Obviously, everybody uses the term platform, so I want to be very careful with that term. But what they've built is a biometric authenticator that sits on top of other platforms that allow authentication into them, but they're providing that the username biometric to pass through to allow them to authenticate. So they're kind of a shim where they interface with all the other platforms that are out there, Octa and all the other kind of single sign-on identity platforms, but just saying, look, if you've got a username and I can authenticate you via biometrics, you don't have to worry about a password anymore. And I thought that was pretty interesting, because we all know identity, username and password isn't really secure. And, we've done a lot of crazy hooks over the years to try to get it better. But this says I can eliminate the password, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, and that's a really exciting area for me too, Matt, is eliminating the password, and the vendors that are doing work in that area. I think we're going to see an explosion in that, because users are frustrated with passwords and two-factor tokens and all that stuff.
Agreed.
Let's see. I did a couple of briefings on the IoT security front. So to speak, it's interesting. Zingbox is what I would call more of a traditional IoT security play. They are really big on the identification of IoT devices and helping you manage all of your IoT devices that you might think. And these are actual physical devices, right? And I think Zingbox is playing more in the ICS security space. And Matt, you covered them, I think, on Black Hat a couple of years ago. Again, they're going down what I think is now like the traditional IoT security route, big in healthcare and big in ICS, where you have a lot of physical IoT style devices that you can't patch and all those things. Zingbox is something that you should probably be considering for that. especially in healthcare. It seems like where they had a lot of their success. And their integration with NAC, I guess you could call it. And I mean, NAC has really transitioned into this IoT security space in a big way. They can, since they're really good at identifying devices, you can block certain devices, right? So if you're in the environment and you're like, oh, I don't want Amazon devices on my network, this can identify them and stop them from getting on the network in conjunction with the NAC. So I thought that was really cool. The other one that was super interesting, and a different one that we've covered before in the show, and we weren't exactly sure what their take on it was, but that's Eclypsium. And I thought this was really awesome because they've done some really cool research, of course, and the founders, some of the founders and engineers worked at Intel as well. So they're very much supporting Intel chipsets, but basically they're like, look, whatever infrastructure you have deployed locally, I don't know how this would translate up into the cloud, but at least locally, right? If you think about, I've got servers, computers, devices, they've got subsystems on them that are essentially embedded devices, right? Your network card has some type of firmware on it. Your BIOS has some type of firmware on it. Your remote control and administration for your servers have some of that on it. A lot of those are Intel-based. And what Eclypsium is saying, look, you can do VM all day long, but how do you know when something's embedded itself into a subsystem of your server, right? And the Eclypsium is the ones, I believe, that did the research that, you can move a system from cloud provider within the cloud provider, and that malware can essentially follow it along. So they're basically proving the point that there's a huge gap in your enterprise security architecture, that if you're not looking for what firmware is installed on all of those systems, how are you updating it, and how do you know that it's actually a trusted update, or the problems that Eclypsium is working on? So their messaging is centered around enterprises, but now I understand the problem that they solve, which didn't come across when we were covering them before. So I'm glad I caught up with them. And John, their VP of engineering, was super technical and super, super smart. And they're really one of the leading companies that's looking in this area, which is really cool. Again, very focused on Intel devices, and kind of sitting in that operating system layer. And we had some interesting conversations, about that, because I was like, well, how are you looking at the firmware and stuff? And if you think about it, the operating system has access to some of these subsystems. Now, when you update your BIOS, for example, you go into your operating system, you might install a utility, and then that transfers the firmware. Well, basically, that's a two-way street for them because of the driver layer they're in, so they can pull out and analyze firmware that are on your various subsystems. I don't know anything else. I mean, there could be, but I don't know anything else in the market today that's targeted at enterprises that's doing that. So it was good. That was a good briefing. I like their technology a lot. What else did we do, Matt?
I did some data, right? I didn't do my data play. So my data briefing was with Baffle, baffle.io, I believe. And this is an interesting one, right? I've always said Nirvana is protecting the data. If we could encrypt the data and analyze it all encrypted and it can live anywhere, all the other security solutions could literally go out the window, because it's all about data at the end of the day.
Right.
So Baffle's done is built solutions around protecting either row-based or column-based data in the data stores themselves. And, I said, okay, so what about like homomorphic encryption? He says, well, we're kind of like that, but not with all the overhead, right? Nirvana in the data space is homomorphic encryption. We've covered a few different vendors here in the shows over the past couple of years. They have what they say homomorphic-like characteristics, where they can analyze data, sort data, filter data while it's encrypted. So they don't need to decrypt the data, which therefore protects it and doesn't make you change the application. Supposedly, any app can use this without making any application changes. Obviously, I think it's something I want to see in action, but really intriguing, because if you can truly keep the data encrypted and still be able to work on that data in an encrypted state, that has some advantages, and I think very innovative in the data protection space.
So, how does this work exactly, right? Because I'm not the crypto expert either. I don't think you are either. I think we both kind of
I'm not. This was where I did the worst on my CISSP exam, was crypto.
And Doug White and Jeff Mann certainly are the ones I bring in when we talk about this, especially this particular situation that you're describing from the vendor, which I think is super cool.
Yeah, but what my understanding is they're looking at, for the application, what data are they accessing and which data should be protected, and then providing both either a column or kind of a record-based encryption model around that data, but then still has the ability to analyze. I don't know how they do it. We didn't get into the details. I just thought it was very intriguing because this is one of these areas where a lot of people struggle. Things like homomorphic encryption are kind of, we're making progress there, but it adds overhead. There's a lot of questions about performance. My understanding is you have to change the way the application works to leverage homomorphic encryption. So is this an easier way to approach data security? Maybe. So it'd be fun to get, Jeff or Doug to dig in this a little bit. So that's all I know, but it was intriguing nonetheless.
Awesome.
Yeah, we obviously clouds out there, right? We talked a little bit about cloud security and kind of the transport layer. I met with a couple of the cloud security providers, Lacework, which I think a lot of people probably know. Lacework's been around for a little while, really focused more on compliance and configuration of the cloud platforms and the cloud workloads. We've seen similar solutions like Evident.io and Redlock and others in the space. Yeah, I spent some time with them. The other one was kind of a new startup. Some ex-IBM folks left IBM a little while ago, kind of batted around some ideas. Sonray, I think it's Sonray.
Yep.
Sonrai. And what they're doing is really trying to help solve more of the initial identity and data in the cloud, which is a little different take, right? You've seen a lot of focus on validating the configuration of your cloud accounts. What they're trying to do is say, well, where's the identity and data in these environments? Because we're moving more stuff to the cloud, people are having a hard time kind of figuring out, okay, what's out there? What assets do I have out there? What user accounts do I have out there? What data do I have out there? And they're trying to understand that and build some graphical representations of that environment. Intriguing. I think they're really early stage yet. I'm not sure that there's how much functionality is out there yet. Kind of took it as a really early stage, but something to take a look at, because I think this is one of the challenges when you take a data center and you put it in the cloud. It ends up in potentially dozens of regional zones in Amazon under multiple AWS accounts. It's like, how do I pull all that data together and get a good footprint of what my inventory looks like? So that looks like the problem they're trying to solve.
Where do we want to go next? Mine were kind of all over the map, not in any particular category. I did meet with Veridin on the breach and attack simulation side. And I think what really differentiates Veridin from a lot of the other players in this space is they're very tied to the defenses. I think they kind of stand out in that space as, yes, we'll help you run through a breach simulation. However, their kind of niche in this market, and they come from the SIM, some of the founders came from Anomaly, right, is they're very tied into your other technology, specifically SIM. So they can tell you, look, we ran this breach simulation. By the way, your SIM either caught it or didn't catch it. And if it didn't catch it, here's why, and here's how you configure your SIM to catch it. And you can keep running through these scenarios, and it's just constantly very focused on integrating and telling you what you're doing wrong in your defenses. That was really, I think, in a nutshell, the claim to fame for Veridin, certainly, and where it stands out in identifying. Oh, and the other thing they can do is they're also integrated the other way into threat intelligence. So they're partnering with Anomaly and Flashpoint and Intel 471, which is a Dutch company, to take the threat intelligence feeds and TTPs, right? Tools, tactics, and techniques, processes, right? That an attacker would use, and automatically creating a breach simulation for that, and then running it through your network. So if you've got, this report that comes in that says this particular group is targeting companies in your industry, and here's how they're doing it, you can automatically create a simulation that runs that through your network to say, here's, if or how you would get pwned via that attack. So that was pretty new and interesting, Matt, and kind of shows Veridon's kind of inroads into SIM and threat intelligence, especially in both directions. Right.
Trying to pull it all together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I thought that was kind of a neat feature. I hadn't seen that yet. They can also do a lot of things with drift, right? So the other thing is, we've all seen this in pen test, right? You come and do the pen test, everything could be great, or you could have a deficiency, right? But now you're going in and making changes. So let's say you do the pen test and they detected you, and that's great. But then they do an update to whatever product that was that detected you. Some configuration could change, some signatures could get updated. I've seen this drift in malware strains that are really old and have multiple versions that have accumulated over the years. In an attempt to detect the more recent versions, they'll miss like the original version of this malware. So if you use that old version of malware, it actually bypasses some defenses. So they're able to detect that drift in your products. Again, very product focused. That was Veridon. And then we did an interview with Scythe. We've talked a lot about Scythe. You can look at the Scythe product. That is more geared towards your purple team, right? Your red team and purple team, in my opinion, is making it easy to execute and customize too. I think that the Scythe's kind of feature for me is that customization of your different payloads and helping automate those red team tests and having real malware go on your systems that is benign, but I think presents a more realistic approach to how these payloads are executing. So that was the ones we did in breach and attack simulation. We did XM Cyber too. Super easy to use interface. Again, they just want a repeatable process to always be out there and integrate into your alerts. So in exciting space, we'll talk more about breach and attack simulation. The one on the SOC side that I really, really liked, Matt, was Simplify. And there were a couple of things that really stood out for me with Simplify. And one was that I'm like, so how in the SOAR market, we've seen Rapid7 make the early acquisition of Command. We've seen Phantom Cyber get bought by Splunk, and we've recently seen Demisto get bought by Palo Alto. And I think we've seen a lot of these acquisitions because those companies really had just the SOAR platform, right? They were like, well, if you need automation and orchestration to be part of your process, then we have the solution, and they were really part of a larger solution. Simplify's approach is to give you a more encompassing platform. So yes, you can automate certain tasks. However, it's got playbooks. It's got over 200 integrations with your tools. It's one platform that can do things like case management and shift transitions. So let's say you have a SOC that's staffed 24/7 and there's a shift change. How do you get the information that one analyst was working on and transition that over to the new analyst that's coming into the SOC? So they're really addressing those operational security issues that you have in your SOC and not just trying to give you an automation component. Again, nothing wrong with that, but Simplify's approach is we want to give you more, and we want you to use this as your SOC platform to do not just your automation and integrations, but manage your SOC in the way you manage your SOC. Tell us what your shift transition is. Tell us how you want to do case management, how those cases are managed from person to person, from incident to incident. And I think the killer feature for me was how they're talking about applying AI and machine learning. So, and I was like, I wanted this for our own operations that are not necessarily security related, right? But for example, and this is I don't know if this is specific to what they're building in, but the gist of it is if you've got an event of a type, a type A kind of event incident, right? And they noticed that every time there's an incident of this kind, it goes to Analyst A, and Analyst A closes the ticket in less than 24 hours. When that type of event goes to Analyst B, that closure time goes to 48 or 72 hours. What the system will do is automatically assign those type of cases to a particular agent or set of SOC analysts, right? So they're adding intelligence into the workflow of your response, which I thought was a really smart. I mean, if they're collecting all that data, they can analyze it and say, well, basically when things take this path, it takes less time to remediate. And so make sure that this type of event always goes down that path. And I'm like, that is an awesome use case for AI and or machine learning.
Not just a technology platform, but really a process improvement platform.
Yeah,
the ability to streamline your process and optimize that process flow.
And that's exactly why they're still standing on their own, doing well as a company, and because they're solving the more encompassing problems that a SOC has. Just taking one feature or one tool, right, is typically how we have built the SOCs, right? They're like, oh, I've got 8 to 25 browser tabs open, right? And I'm going to all these different tools and trying to integrate it together. Simplify says, just come to our platform. We'll help streamline your whole workflow. So that was a good one for me. That was my standout one, was definitely that approach in Simplify, and really explaining to me what their perspective and point of view was in the market. And I think they're very well positioned to continue to do very well.
Good. I did a couple on the digital risk side, and that's what I would classify as those external digital asset assessment type of tools. So this would be people that would be in the space with BitSight and Security Scorecard. So I met with RiskRecon, which definitely competes right into that space, right? Yep. They're looking at your external digital assets and really trying to understand what's the potential risk posture. Mm-hmm. And if you know the BitSight scorecard a little bit, they have their little scoring systems to identify the potential risk of those external assets. And it's used in validating some of your third-party assessment work. Mm-hmm. RiskRecon, the thing that caught my interest the most was via passive analysis, they're analyzing the data going to and from these assets, and they're doing some interesting classifications where they say they can understand value at risk. Now, we've seen some of the value at risk vendors a couple of years ago kind of a little ahead of their time, because understanding value at risk is very difficult, in my opinion, because you have to come up with automation schemes to understand the criticality of the asset and the data that the assets have to put a risk value on them. And then eventually tie some value to it, right? Supposedly, they've built some capabilities into their passive analysis that allows them, based on what they see, do some of that automation around criticality and also do some of that assignment of value so that they can give you more of a value at risk type of assessment than just a grade or a score. I thought that was interesting. It would be fun to kind of dig in to really understand what they do, but that's how they're differentiating themselves over somebody like BitSight or Security Scorecard. The other one then was CyberInt, and they're a little broader than just the digital risk platforms. They're very focused on retail banks, very kind of consumer focused companies. And what they're providing is kind of interesting. It's a little bit of threat intelligence. It's a little bit of external digital risk. It's a little bit of social media and some other capabilities, right? So they're really horizontal, but in a very specific industry. You wouldn't see them in healthcare necessarily or anything like that. They've just kind of focused their industry on retail banking, but go a little broader than a traditional just that external digital risk component and kind of morph over into a couple things. So if somebody's looking for kind of an all-in-one solution to help them manage kind of their external exposure at the consumer across the asset, maybe over into the social media side, maybe an interesting play versus maybe what an enterprise would do is maybe 3 or 4 different solutions that they'd have to piece together.
Yeah, that's an interesting space of how deep each vendor goes. I think it kind of it crosses like threat intelligence into like looking at your external footprint, right? Along with analyzing the risk of people you might be partnering with or M&A activity. And they all kind of have their different niches. Some of them are heavier in threat intelligence, some of them are heavy in external scanning, and some of them tie into and partner with the cyber risk companies. So it's an interesting space. I think, you look at Bit Discovery, which is just totally about discovery, and then, they partner with threat intelligence and vice versa. There's really, I think there's no excuse for you not to know what your external footprint is today, because there's lots of options out there for you that each give you some of those different kind of features, right?
Yeah, definitely. And a lot of these technologies then partner in with the third-party platforms, the Prevalence and the Cyber GRXs and those other solutions that are trying to do more of the internal assessment of controls. Then you compare that to the external posture of what that vendor looks like, and you kind of correlate between the two. They kind of each have their swim lane,
right? And
you kind of bring that data together to get a much better understanding of third-party risk.
Yep.
I did have a couple on the networking side. Network security still has its place in certain areas. So one was Ericom, which is doing web and email filtering more around malware isolation. The way this works is reverse proxy of web and email traffic to their platform, strips out known malware, and then delivers email and the web traffic back malware free. Interesting, right? I mean, we see a lot of malware being passed that way. So, instead of having maybe an email or web filter on the front end, like a proof point, potentially, this is a solution that works in the cloud. My guess is they also probably compete with folks like Mimecast and others in that email and web filtering space. But I did talk to them a little bit on their stuff, and they're really focused on stripping out the malware. I don't know that they do a lot of other capabilities outside of kind of that malware isolation, but interesting. And then the last one, which was you had a fun discussion with Dirk on this one, is Untangle, which is, look, it's an SMB. It's a pure SMB play. It is simplifying things like firewall, IDS, IPS, spam filtering, just the basic kind of perimeter stuff where, you have small doctor's offices, dentist offices, maybe small branch locations, no technical staff, and people need to set up and configure some sort of perimeter device easily. Untangle makes it really simple. It's all about ease of use for them. So if somebody needs some of these services at very small locations, this is a really simple solution, very cost effective compared to some of the other major firewall vendors that are out there. Just, it's a pure play SMB, but interesting because you and Dirk got into a conversation about pfSense and all the work that you were doing. Just kind of bundled it all up in a nice little form factor and deliver it as a software or as an appliance, whatever you want.
Right. Yeah, I think the advantage for Untangle in that is it is geared towards the SMB, and it's easier and more robust in the other features you get on top of firewalling, right? I mean, let's face it, you can buy a really cheap firewall to just pass traffic and stop the internet from getting in and let everything else out, and that's very basic. There's a million choices there, right? And then the next phase for SMB is to maybe go to something like a pfSense or something like that, but that requires, at least when I did it, and there'll be technical segments on Pulse Security Weekly about it, the more advanced you get, the more you have to know about not just Linux and BSD, right? You got to spec the right hardware, and you have to build all of the firewall rules and everything yourself from scratch and read a lot of documentation. What I like about Untangle is it's like you just drop it in, and it's super easy for those in the SMB. And a lot more of a trend that I'm seeing is that you can just run it on Linux and a Virtualbox or whatever, right? And it's easy to install because it's just basically like another VM image. So, and Virtualbox is really easy. I was actually just playing with it today. For just that reason, and Security Onion offers it as well to run these larger security suites that are all-encompassing and make it easy for those small businesses. So, and Untangle got great reviews when I was looking at Firewall. So,
Yeah, and they have a free product. So they have a basic free product that does basic firewall, basic IPS, antivirus, and spam. If you don't need advanced features, that may be enough. And you could just go out and download the software, install it on a box, really easy to set up, and you're done. You don't need anything else, and it's free. So we should probably have the Untangle folks come on and talk about their free product, just because I think would be interesting for home users and or really small businesses that don't need super advanced features. They just need some basics. Maybe that's enough.
Right. The other briefing I did is switching back to the gigantic enterprise side is Radware, right? Big company, a lot of technology, a lot of, I believe a lot of them from acquisitions as well. In fact, they just made an acquisition of, I forget the name of the company, but they do bot analysis, right? We've had Distill and others on there. They made an acquisition in that space. They're combining that bot analysis with their web application firewall, with their other products that do workload protection in the cloud. And they're very much now want to have a suite of products that help organizations transition everything into the cloud. And again, big, huge, over-encompassing term, but there's sets of functionality within their product suite that make it easier for larger companies that are making that transition to cloud. And not every department within that company is the same, and not every company is the same. But Radware wants to have that suite where they can say, look, if you're moving everything into the cloud, whatever you're moving, start moving onto our platform, configuring it, and then making the rest of your transition much, much easier by having all these products that are really geared towards very large enterprises. So that was
kind of more your all-in-one play. Yes,
all-in-one play, specifically on, they use the term workload protection, right? And I think purposely to be generic, to say, we were talking earlier about the different cloud providers, right? Making it easier, like wherever you're going, it follows your workload, right? Really speaking to that story of the securities in your application now, right? And the other infrastructure things can apply, like the bot detection in WAF and things like that. So it was interesting.
Yeah, how many? I think I hit all mine.
I think I hit all mine too.
Any? You want to cover any kind of big announcements? I only found a couple. A lot of stuff was pre-announced before RSA this year. There was a couple interesting things that I thought were interesting. Right?
Our pick, the top product that now I'm learning there's a lot of buzz about it. It wasn't just, John Strand actually walked me over to the Chronicle booth and said, you have to see the demo of this backstory thing. And I was like, wow. And then I was like, wow, now I know why you, very quickly I was like, now I know why you dragged me over here. And John was like interrupting. He's like, show him how it does this and show him how it does that. And I was like, wow, that is really cool. Basically, you can collect telemetry in the form of logs or traffic from anywhere and send it up into their product called Backstory and do all of the analysis that us nerds love to do. It's super fast. It looks super easy to set up. It was one of those things I saw where I was like, I get the problem. Like, where's my checkbook? I want this. It actually, for us, it would make sense to evaluate all of the security, free and commercial security products that are collecting data, and evaluate some of the techniques. Like, I want to look at this data in this way. It would facilitate all of that. I was like, seriously, like, where do I sign? Like, this thing is awesome. And we don't often do those kind of demos where you're like, I have to have this now. And that was one. And talking to some of my other peers, they've also heard a buzz from everyone who went to RSA and saw that demo as well, and said it was the coolest tech out there. So definitely worth checking out. Well,
then Google made the big announcement for the free SIM early in RSA, which was a lot of buzz around. We heard some good reviews of people that were original prototypes, that it's really solid. I think there's some concerns about what they're going to do with the data, but that's an interesting spin. Go look, here's a free SIM. Octa made an acquisition towards the end of the week. Asadoorian, more around some of the automation that we were talking about, back to the theme of some of that automation that we saw. This is to help them move identity into applications as part of some of the DevOps tools and automation. I thought that was an interesting acquisition. Tufin filed for IPO also late last week to go public. So that was an interesting announcement, really at the kind of the tail end of RSA last week. Yeah. Well, and Verizon acquired ProtectWise right before the conference on Friday, right before we went out. Verizon made the acquisition of ProtectWise, which is a Colorado-based company here. I know Scott Chasen and Gene and the gang over there pretty well. That broke right before RSA. So some interesting news around RSA outside of our briefings as well.
Yep, absolutely. I think it's all I had for RSA. In terms
I think that's it for RSA.
That we did, stuff that we saw.
Yeah. So we're going to, if you stay tuned, we're going to do a couple of our interview segments right after this, pre-recorded from RSA 2019. And then we'll see you all again next week on Enterprise Security Weekly.